And this is where we left off in the last class. Okay, we went through our 6 trig functions, which again we just reviewed. And then finding sine, cosine, tangent, cotangent, secant, cosecant, given side lengths like this problem here. Okay. So the difference is today we are not given all of the information, and we're going to use the sine, cosine, or tangent to find a side length or an angle. So, for example, problem number 4, we're trying to figure out what x is. So that's important. I have this 8. So since that's given, I'm going to try and use that if I can. And I have this 60-degree angle. So I'm going to try and use that. I have 3 pieces of information. I have the angle, I have side 8, and I have x, which I don't know, but I can tell that that's the hypotenuse. So the first thing I want to do is say, what is the relation between these 3 things? Well, in reference to the angle, this is the adjacent, and this is the hypotenuse. So which of our 3 trig functions, the sine, the cosine, or the tangent, which one uses the adjacent and the hypotenuse? That's the cosine. So I could set up that the cosine of 60 degrees is equal to the adjacent, which is not x, I'm sorry, the adjacent is 8 over the hypotenuse x. Okay, again, in reference to this angle, I did the cosine of 60 is the adjacent, which was 8, over the hypotenuse, which was x. Now, how did I know to use the cosine? Because 8 was adjacent and x was the hypotenuse. Okay, if they were in different places, I would use a different function. So once I have this set up, I should be able to solve that for x. So I can, to solve that for x, I can multiply both sides by x. So I have x times the cosine of 60 degrees is equal to 8. And then divide both sides by the cosine of 60. So 8 is equal to, x is equal to 8 divided by the cosine of 60 degrees. Now I'm going to use my calculator, but I'll let you guys get caught up here. And again, I multiply both sides by x, and then I divide both sides by cosine of 60. So x equals 8 divided by cosine of 60. So let's go to our calculators. Now, everybody should do this because there's something really important I need to show you on your calculators. So I know most of you are using the Inspire, so that's what I'm going to do. But if you're using something else, I can also show you how to change a particular setting on your calculators. What we first need to do when we're doing trig stuff right now is in this upper right-hand corner in the settings, we need to make sure that our angle measure is set to degree. Yours may say radian, or it may even say gradient. We want it to say degree. So click on degree and click on make default. And so that means when we type in 60, the calculator thinks that's 60 degrees. So I'm going to do now on my calculator 8 divided by, we use cosine, right? Cosine. So notice the tangent functions are right here. So cosine of 60. And I'll hit enter. So we get 16. Now, did you get 16? If you got anything other than 16, let me know if you got something other than 16. That means you probably did not change your angle measure to be in degrees. Okay, so X comes out to be 16. Any questions on that? All right, so please make sure you guys ask questions early because a lot of this is not just doing the math, but if your calculator isn't set up correctly, we're hitting the wrong buttons. The process doesn't mean much, right? We've got to make sure we're hitting the right buttons. Yeah. Yes. Not the answer you were looking for, Miles? Sorry. All right, I'm going to do part B here. I'll separate it and change colors so you guys can see. All right, so looking for part B, I first have to figure out what function am I going to use. So I'm going to highlight the 3 bits of information. I've got my angle, I've got the opposite, and the adjacent. So now I think which of these uses opposite and adjacent? That is the tangent. So we would set up our ratio as the tangent of 33 degrees is equal to our opposite, which is X, over the adjacent, which is 15. So to solve this for X, now I'm going to multiply both sides by 15. So I get 15 times the tangent of 33 degrees is equal to X. And then I'm just going to plug into the calculator. So on your calculator, you're going to do, we don't have to divide this case because it's already solved for X. So we're just going to do 15 times the tangent of 33. Now, if your calculator gave you this, it doesn't mean you did it wrong. Remember, the Inspire calculator will give you by default exact answers. If we want approximate answers, like what the heck does this mean in the real world, you want to click and hold the enter button down and go to the squiggles. And so we get 9.74. And that seems relative to our picture. X is approximately 9.74. Yes.
Can you use cotangent?
Yeah, good question. Yes, you could use cotangent. I'll show you how in just a second. First, before I switch screens, I want to point out that the red one on the left here, when we were solving for X, the algebra is a little different. You know, when we were solving for X on the left-hand side, we multiplied both sides by X, and then we had to divide by the cosine of 60. So we get 8 divided by the cosine of 60. Because our X was in the denominator, as opposed to the right side, the green side, our X was in the numerator. So I just had to multiply both sides by 15. And so we have 15 times the tangent of 33. Now, to use any of the other functions, if I go back to the calculator screen, to save space, the developers of these calculators said we're only going to use these 3 buttons, but if you click and hold down the sign, it has the inverse sign. I'll talk about that in just a second. And there are the reciprocal functions, the cosecant and the inverse cosecant. So that would be how you would use those. Okay. Any other questions before I move on to the ones below it? All right. The 2 problems below it are that we are now trying to find an angle. So if you are trying to find an angle, as it says right here, to find missing angles, you must use an inverse trig function. So we have to use the inverse trig function to find the angle. is I'm going to do the problem very similarly to the ones we just did. I have this x is important. 8 is the opposite. 4 is the adjacent. And so opposite and adjacent means I'm going to use a tangent function. So I would set up the tangent of x is equal to 8 over 4. Now, to find that inverse, or to find that angle, we have to use the inverse button. So here's what we do. We do the inverse tangent. Remember, that's the tangent with a little -1 of 8 over 4, or 2. Okay, you can find the inverse tangent of 2. It's the same thing. But to plug that into our calculators, I have to go to tangent, click and hold it down and do the inverse tangent of, I forgot my numbers already, 8 over 4. Inverse tangent of 8 over 4. No, you could, I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah, what the heck is that thing, right? Remember, let's approximate that. Okay, so it is about 63.4 degrees. What? So x is, I'm going to change it to about 63.4 degrees. Yeah, don't worry about its equal thing that it spit out in the calculator. We'll get to all that good stuff later. Yeah, Frederick. We will not. All right, so for part B, 5B, here's my angle. I have the adjacent. I have the hypotenuse. So adjacent and hypotenuse is cosine. So I would say the cosine of x is equal to 7 over 19. And since we're trying to find an angle measure, we do the inverse cosine of 7 over 19. So x is approximately 68.4 degrees. Okay, so the top two problems we were finding side lengths. The bottom two we were finding angles, and when we were doing angles, we used the inverse button. I do have one more thing to show you, but is there any questions on this before I show you the next and last thing? Yes.
What happens instead of doing the inverse, you divide by the cosine?
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is looking at this, you know, algebra says, hey, can I just divide by cosine, right? Cosine is a function, doesn't have a numeric value, so we can't divide by cosine. It doesn't work because it's a function. Functions have to have input. That means that this is all considered one piece. Okay, the cosine of x. Good question. Anything else? Yes.
Is there an opposite like cotangent?
Tangent and cotangent are reciprocals of each other, yes. Okay. All right, so looking at the bottom problems, we have just a couple of definitions here, angle of elevation and angle of depression. I'm not going to harp on those too much, but I want to look at those definitions will be there if you might need them on your homework. But let's take a look at problem number 7. It says a 15-foot ladder leans against a wall and an angle of elevation of 60 degrees. So kind of looking at this picture here, here's our wall. Here is our angle of elevation. And so this is our picture. And we're talking about right triangles here. Okay, we can assume the wall is perpendicular to the floor. Here's our 15-foot ladder, and our angle of elevation was 60 degrees. So we obviously need to set up an accurate picture. If I put that 60 in the wrong place, it's going to mess up the problem. So again, a 15-foot ladder leans against the wall at an angle of elevation of 60. How far from the wall is the base of the ladder? How far from the wall? Well, here's the wall, here's the base of the ladder. So we're trying to find X. So setting up the triangle correctly is huge. If not, it doesn't matter what we do from here. But now that I have it set up, here's my angle. This is adjacent. And 15 is the hypotenuse. And so I'm going to use the cosine. So I would say the cosine of 60 degrees is X over 15. So I multiply both sides by 15. So I get 15 times the cosine of 60 degrees is equal to X. And let's plug that in again in approximation. A nice number, huh? 15 halves or 7.5, of course, right? So X is equal to 7.5, or you could write, the fraction. And when you're done, your answer should be relative to the picture. All right, last one, guys. Hang in there. So for problem 8, we have a 50-foot pole, has a support wire. So let me draw, here's our 50-foot pole. Has a support wire that runs from the top to the ground with an angle of depression of 75 degrees. All right, so this one is a little tricky with the picture. Here's our angle of depression. Notice our picture up here, okay? Our angle of depression is 75 degrees, which means this angle down here is also 75 degrees. Because I'm sure your geometry teacher would be proud to know that you remember alternate interior angles are congruent. All right, now the question is, how much wire is used? Well, the amount of wire, that's the hypotenuse here. And so I have an angle of 75. I have the opposite, which is 50, and the hypotenuse X. So opposite and hypotenuse is the sine. So I would say the sine of 75 equals 50 over X. So X is going to be 50 divided by the sine of 50, sine of 75. All right, so again, practice plugging that into your calculator. Make sure you get 51.8 And so that's 51.8 is how much wire we used. And I think it was given in feet. Yes, appreciate. How did I get this part? Yes? I skipped one step. I multiplied both sides by x. So I got x times the sine of 75 equals 50. And then I divided by the sine of 75. Okay. Anything else? Sorry, guys, the screen is lagging behind a little bit.